So welcome back to those who are joining us online into our fourth and penultimate session. We've talked so far about how we can use visual representation of data to help us in our analysis and in our presentation of our findings. We've wrestled with complexity through the lens of integration. How do we figure out the various strands? How do we think through problems that are complex without making them reduced or simplistic? We've heard about rigor and quality, which may trigger certain approaches or limitations, and heard the nuance around what could reporting guidelines offer to us in speaking to the intentionality and the design decisions that we've made and the analytical choices that we've adopted that lead us to our conclusions. And now for our final portion, we want to have a conversation around how, and I think it's been articulated perhaps in some of our conversation already, mixed method studies that have a qualitative strength in them. What does this mean? What are the implications? And what can we learn and understand if we take that adoption or that lens in our design? Our final speaker is Dr. Susan Jack, who's a professor and the Dorothy C. Hall Chair in Nursing Research in the School of Nursing. She's also an associate member in the Department of Health Research Methods. Dr. Jack is an applied health researcher who has engaged in the development and evaluation of complex interventions to improve health and social incomes of infants, women, and families experiencing social and economic disadvantage. She's had a very illustrious and sustained career. Dr. Jack.
Great, thank you very much, Jonathan. One of the privileges of being in a school of nursing is that for over 22 years, I've been able to teach a graduate level qualitative health research methods course, as well as on many years, a mixed methods research course for master's and PhD students. So I've done that for over 22 years, and often as a result of that teaching, somehow I found my way. I've just recently counted. I've been on over 70 student committees or supervising students. And the benefits of that work is I established quite a big network across our Faculty of Health Sciences. And in these courses and on these committees, I get to work with students from rehabilitation sciences and nursing and global health and public health and health research methods. So because of that big network, many years ago, a colleague, another faculty member in one of the departments in the School of Medicine contacted me, said, "Hey, can we talk?" And I'm like, "Sure." And he came to me and he said, "Oh, we did a qualitative study because we're developing an implementation toolkit. And now we're evaluating and testing the uptake and impact of this implementation toolkit. And we're thinking actually we're doing a mixed methods research study. So can you actually help us write this up as a mixed methods research study?" And I'm like, okay, normally I wouldn't go backwards, but that's okay. This is exciting. You're thinking about mixed methods. And I love methods. And I said, okay, so you said you did a qualitative study. Let's start there. If I'm going to help you write this up, then let's start from the beginning. Start to give me some details of your project. Tell me about your qualitative study. And he said, well, we were at a conference with all these fancy experts, XY big conference. And we talked to about 6 people and got their opinions on what should be in our toolkit. Okay, and? No, that's our qualitative study. And at that point, I have different expectations of what I expect in a qualitative research study. And so I pulled out some sort of nice thing like, oh, that's a really interesting project, and I'm so overcommitted right now, and I really couldn't give you the time and energy to do something to the quality that you deserve, and maybe here's some other people that can help you backwards write your mixed methods paper. That's anecdotal, but it exists also in the literature. So I pulled these out. I'm not as brave to put the whole citation, so that's why they're a little blurry of some screenshots. Sure enough, I found a paper that said 5 surgeons with a national education role and who were speakers, discussants at the Association of Surgeons of Great Britain and Ireland Conference were interviewed. They were presented with 5 open questions. Now, this is a completely different study. I was talking to a Canadian colleague. So again, I was like, oh, There are other people around the world that think if you just go and talk to some people and get their opinions, that that's apparently qualitative research. So that's a challenge when I'm reading mixed methods papers going, oh, okay, the qualitative part there, they're maybe just not aware of what a qualitative study is. The second one is another one of my pet peeves. So it says afterwards, so different study, afterwards, a qualitative study will be conducted using directed content analysis following the recommended steps. And I'm like, so I look through the methods and I'm like, okay, so a qualitative study, yay, great. But what's the design? Because if you don't tell me the design, then I don't know the rules for sampling. I don't know the rules by which I should judge your data generation. I don't know the rules for your analysis. And then I start to get really irritated because once when I was in a position to write up a randomized controlled trial, which ended up being published in JAMA, let me tell you, when we published this trial in JAMA, I had to scratch my qualitative brain and write all these methods for a cluster-based RCT conducted in 15 sites, how we did the randomization, the allocation. And I had to write, cluster-based randomized controlled trial. Can you imagine me sending a paper to JAMA and saying, oh, I did a quantitative study? No, those rules you're not allowed to do that in quantitative research. So the rules should be the same in qualitative health research. What's your design? Another challenge that we see a lot in some of the published mixed method and qualitative research is another mismatch. So in the third box, they say the study included 66 students. The students completed a questionnaire consisting of open-ended questions. Now, it's a whole other lecture to talk about whether surveys or questionnaires with open text are mixed method studies or mixed data, but that's a different topic for discussion. But here, okay, I can visualize they've got probably a survey with lots of questions, and there's some open text box where people can, if they choose, type in some stuff. We've probably all seen that data, or we've probably all been asked to complete some open text box on a survey. Who here completes all those open text box on a survey? Who sometimes skips them because you're like, it's easier just to circle 1 to 5. I skip a lot of the open text box. And what I've discovered in a lot of those open text box, the data will be great. It's often grocery list stuff. Here are the barriers, here are the factors, here's the things we liked, here's a recommendation. It's good data, but it's often very thin data. So that's fine, they've done this. We expect that it's probably going to be thin data. I would expect that you would probably analyze it using something like content or frequency analysis. But here they go using Giorgio's method. And I'm like, wow. And I don't expect everyone here to be qualitative researchers, but Giorgio's method is for phenomenology, from philosophy. And the type of data that you would apply Giorgio's method to would be if you were like doing 5 hours of interviews with one person multiple times, and you have like this depth of data. So I'm like, they must have just found something that said qualitative analysis and thought, we'll just slap this word on to show like maybe we thought we were doing something. So these are the challenges in the literature. And if I'm going to summarize those challenges, really, what are the recurring problems in the reporting of mixed methods or the design even of mixed methods studies at the protocol stage, is that in many fields, and particularly in health, in different disciplines or fields, we may still see quantitative dominance, and the qualitative is just an add-on. And we have structures within our systems that require that. So Sarah and I last night were talking about if you apply to CIHR and you're doing a randomized controlled trial, there's a template you have to use. But if your trial is part of a mixed method study, then you are trying to jam the qualitative in. So sometimes there's some structural or system issues that still in health make quantitative the dominance. The second recurring problem I've already identified is sometimes the qualitative design is just really unspecified. They're doing some sort of generic qualitative study, or they'll call it an interview or a focus group study. Interviews and focus groups are very appropriate ways to collect the data, to generate the data, but they're not the design or the overarching method that gives us the rules by which to judge. And to me, it's important to know what that design is. And I think this is where it's important to state a little bit of positionality, because as qualitative researchers, we're always trying to situate ourselves. And I've been here at McMaster since 1997, master's, PhD, postdoc, full-time faculty since 2003. And for some of you, you may be quite aware that McMaster is like the home, the hotbed of evidence-based medicine. And then the first textbook on evidence-based nursing in those periods of the late 90s started to arise, and then evidence-informed decision-making. So all of us who've been through this period, just by being a virtue of McMaster, all of my learning has always focused on the principles of evidence-informed medicine, nursing, EDIM, and that process of articulating a research question, searching for the literature. When you find the evidence, then you need to critically appraise the evidence. And in most critical appraisal tools, the first questions are, is a clearly articulated research question stated? And then is the best design been selected to answer that question? So I come from this culture of expecting to see a design that then allows me, if I know the design, I know the rules, I can appraise the study. The other challenge is sometimes a qualitative design is articulated, but it's completely mismatched to the study aim. So the study aim might be, we want to describe the factors that influence access to some sort of health service. But later on in the methods and the analysis, they're like, but we're going to use grounded theory and an adapted grounded theory approach to analysis. And I'm like, okay, but if your purpose is to describe or identify factors that influence, essentially barriers and facilitators, why are you using a method from the social sciences that is used to generate mid-range theories, right? It's a research approach to generate theory. There's a complete mismatch there. Another recurring problem is really a lack of adherence to using or applying the principles of purposeful sampling. So we end up really with these weak samples, mostly convenient samples. Or there is, again, really a lack of details or opaqueness about the data analytic procedures. And something that I think I call name and claim, where they write and say, this is what we're doing, but really they're doing something else. So they'll, again, like, they say, this is a grounded theory study, but when you look at it, they're really only doing a descriptive study. So these are some of the recurring problems. And when I look at this, yes, with judgment. And we all judge, and in academia, we get lots of skills in critiquing and reviewing, but I judge with grace because I think about all of the clinician scientists who are really motivated to do good science for the improvement of patient outcomes and care. And they're doing this science without the context of 5, 7, 9 years of training in a method. And I think becoming a researcher or methodologist is a lot like parenting in that we do the best that we can at the time with the information and tools that we have. And when we know better, we do better. So I want us today to start to think about how we do better within this qualitative component of mixed methods research studies. And why does this matter, right? So what? Why does this matter? And here's why it matters. It's because mixed methods research is really premised on the idea that qualitative and quantitative strands each contribute distinct but complementary insights, and that when they're integrated, they produce a more complete understanding of a phenomenon. And if the qualitative strand lacks rigor, depth, or a clear design, it becomes, I think, methodologically tokenistic. And it ends up being, we're just adding it so we can add some quotes or to explain some numbers. And this results or maintains a hierarchy of methods where quantitative dominates and qualitative, again, is treated as anecdotal rather than contributing meaningfully in an analytic way. The other reason why this matters is that it leads to weak interpretive and contextual understanding. So qualitative research, the reason that we collect qualitative data is that it offers contextualization, interpretive depth, insight into meaning and into experiences. And when a study is poorly designed, so again, there's no guiding methodology, there's an unclear analytic approach, inadequate sampling, the qualitative findings really start to become really just descriptive rather than interpretive. And in many cases, this starts to limit a study's ability to answer those important how and why questions. And when we can answer those how and why questions, that's what can really illuminate our quantitative data. And the consequence of this is that without a strong qualitative foundation, I think mixed methods studies may miss the very mechanisms and processes or contextual nuances that mixed methods studies are meant to reveal. And when your qualitative data, if it sucks or the methods are weak, it really impairs this process of integration that we've been talking about all today. And effective integration depends on both strands, or in a multi-phase, all the strands being very robust. So weak qualitative findings or methods make it difficult to integrate findings meaningfully. And there's just really not enough analytic depth or information or conceptual clarity to connect with the quantitative results. And this integration step really then might start to be superficial or forced. And the consequence of this challenge is that the hallmark of mixed methods, this integration or this meta inference, or the generation of new insights, is really not achieved. I think that it also matters because in the health sciences, when that strand is weak, it diminishes our ability to apply these findings. Applied health researchers, we're trying to solve problems. We're generating insights, evidence to inform new interventions, new assessment tools, new scales, new policies, new educational curricula. We're doing this research to apply to problems. And when that qualitative component, again, is weak, that contextual and experiential knowledge, the kind that helps translate findings into the real world, is really lost. And so while our study may be methodologically mixed, but it might be epistemologically thin. And so it really fails to allow us to inform meaningfully tailored, context-sensitive solutions. And the final one, and again, I think this is one that speaks to me, and there's been a lot of growth since the end of the 90s. I mean, people used to debate, is qualitative research even a science, or does it have any meaning? We've come a long way in 20, 30 years. But we still see, I think, in mixed methods or certain disciplines, when the qualitative work is underdeveloped or undervalued, it really reinforces the perception in some disciplines that qualitative research is like soft or secondary. And I think this type of dynamic on a research team can really impair collaboration. It can stifle methodological innovation. It can limit the growth of rigorous qualitative capacity within our interdisciplinary research teams. And if we continue to have these methodologically weak studies, then this cycle continues where we have weak qualitative training, limited mentorship, and limited mentorship continue to produce weak qualitative research. So what do we do about this? So we've got a problem, we hear why it matters, what are we going to do about it? I think a starting point for researchers is to know what they don't know, and to begin to think about, if we want to design rich, strong, qualitative components of our mixed method studies, what don't we know, and how do we find the resources or people to fill in those gaps? Because to me, another hallmark of mixed methods research is that it is team-based, and that one single person can't do it all or know everything on a mixed methods study. So it's teams, we bring in the people. So the first starting point is to encourage people to think about what it means to design a qualitative study that is methodologically congruent. And when I say methodologically congruent, essentially, you know what your purpose of the study is. That's where you start. What's the problem that you're trying to solve, and what's the purpose of the study? And in qualitative research, is it to describe a phenomenon? Is it to explore and understand a new phenomenon? Is it to explain, to evaluate, to build theory? And so once you know your study purpose, then can you ask a research question? Can you articulate an overarching research question that matches that study purpose? And I think writing the research question is the hardest part. But once you have a really clear research question, then picking the design that's best suited to answer that question should be fairly easy. And once we have the research design, well, we just go read about that design and those methods, and it should tell us what approaches to purposeful sampling are in alignment with that research design, what are the most typical types of data that one is collected in that research design, and I think in qualitative research, the biggest differences between the different research designs are in how they approach the analysis. So it really gives us rules for analysis. So having worked with many novice graduate students or people who are new to qualitative research, colleagues and I have written a lot of articles on the basics of qualitative research. So I want to leave you with tools and strategies today, because of course we don't have like 13 weeks together to teach you a whole paradigm of qualitative methodology. But this is one example that myself and one of my colleagues, Michelle Phoenix, who is in the School of Rehabilitation Sciences, wrote, talking about what is qualitative health research as an applied approach to research, where we go through and give really practical examples of how to write a purpose statement, how to write research questions, frameworks for making decisions around selecting a design. So in that iterative process, or in that process that we talk about this iterative process. So how are you going to select a design? Well, you really sit with your team, or you sit by yourself and you really sort of sit and think, okay, what's the purpose of my study? You know, is it fundamentally to describe the factors that influence people's happiness and satisfaction at a mixed methods workshop? Okay, so I just want to describe the factors. Okay, so I'm going to write that overarching question. Well, what's the best design? It's probably qualitative description. I'm going to ask people some open-ended questions around what did they find most engaging in the workshop? When were they least engaged? What would be their recommendations for future workshops? Were their needs met? So qualitative description is probably an appropriate design. You know, but sometimes you'll get to that design stage and go, oh no, I need to sort of rethink about my study purpose. I want it to be more expansive or explanatory. So maybe I need to pick a different design, or I only want to study this mixed methods workshop. So maybe it's a case study versus qualitative description. So I put this slide up there for as you start to think about how to do your qualitative methods really well, recognizing that this process of picking a design is sort of, you're sitting and thinking about the purpose, the question, the design all at once. And if you make one change to one, it's going to influence the decisions on the others. So the big part too is of things that are important to know that you may not already know, are what are some of the key differences between some of the research designs that are commonly used in applied qualitative health research. And there are many research designs, but I've really picked three that I think are most amenable to embedding or using within mixed methods research studies. I think most of the research that I see in health research within mixed method studies, the qualitative component is really descriptive research. We're asking questions around what are people's experiences? What are people's needs? What are people's recommendations? What were the biggest challenges? How did you address those challenges? What content should be included in this curriculum? What are your preferred formats for learning about X? Those are descriptive questions that are going to generate descriptive data. And there's a design called qualitative description that nicely aligns with those types of questions, those types of objectives. Other researchers may look to case study research. And you know, one of the, of course, irritating things in qualitative research is we have a lot of designs, and then we have some designs that are called the same thing, but different methodologists have developed different approaches. So case study is one of those. In the health sciences, many people use Yin's approach to case study. In education, I think Miriam's approach to case study has emerged. Different people in the social science might use Stake's approach to case study. But if you're evaluating a program, if you're using mixed methods in an evaluative context, if you're evaluating or even developing a new intervention or a program, something with some really defined boundaries, often case study is going to be your friend. It's going to be a great design to help you do that. And the last one I want to share with you as a design option is interpretive description. This is a methodology developed by Sally Thorne, who is a professor at the School of Nursing at University of British Columbia. And she's been a methodologist for a long time. And she's one of her and Jan Morse and Marguerite Sandalowski were early writers talking about the slurring of methods as they came from the social sciences into health. and starting to really articulate that some of the designs and methodologies from the humanities and social sciences that are used to generate theoretical knowledge don't often fit our work in the health sciences when we want to generate applied knowledge. So she actually developed this methodology of interpretive description, where your research questions directly come from practice. And the focus of interpretive description is to identify variations or different patterns of people's experiences, or how a different human phenomenon exists across a population. So how do different people express feelings of grief? I've done an interpretive descriptive study that looks at what are the different ways in which fathers engage in postpartum home visits. What are those different patterns of engagement? So if you're looking to develop disciplinary knowledge, this is a great resource. And again, I'm all about pragmatism and leaving you with resources. So if you're thinking, okay, well, how do I do a qualitative descriptive study? This article by Bradshaw and colleagues, published 2017 in Global Qualitative Nursing Research, is one of those great articles where they go through, here are the ontological and epistemological underpinnings. Here's how you write research questions. Here's the principles of the design. Here are the types of sampling strategies. Here's how you analyze descriptive data. Great article if you're thinking, how do I do a descriptive study? And then Sally Thorne, just this year, has published the 3rd edition of Interpretive Description. And incredibly, she worked with the publisher to ensure that the entire textbook is open access and free. So I've left you the QR code to access this entire textbook on how to do this methodology, which is really a gift to the methods world. So some other things to begin to think about. So we've started to talk about at least letting you know what are some design options. But how to write a research question. I'm a researcher that really believes that if we do research, we need to ask a question, and then we do research to answer the question. And so in the qualitative world, often articles will have these lovely objectives or purpose statements, but there's not often a research question. So I do like to encourage, particularly the students that I work with or in the teams that I work on, that we really think about what are we trying to answer. And we can't, who knows what PICO and PECO is? Big hands up, yep, population, good, so you're all quantitative. We can't apply PICO and PECO to qualitative research. So in our team, we've used the EPIC model for generating overarching qualitative research questions. And that just means that you write a research question that has language that tells you about the emphasis of your study. And that's linked to the study purpose. If your study is descriptive, you're probably asking a what question. If it's exploratory, you might start your research question with how. If it's explanatory, you might ask why. So that's the E in EPIC. We do see in qualitative research, though, that there's sometimes some coded language that's embedded in the overarching research question. So if I see someone that has a research question that's asking about the lived experience, well, when I flip through the methods section, it better be some sort of phenomenology. If I see they're asking about the meaning of a phenomenon, will that be interpretive phenomenology? So you can see here that there's some coded language linked to different methods and designs. Your purposeful sample, your research question should include a description of the people's whose perceptions and experiences and needs and recommendations you're eliciting. So is there some language to describe your purposeful sample? And in qualitative research, we can have homogeneous purposeful samples. So maybe we're only interviewing mothers in the postpartum period with infants under 6. Or maybe if we're thinking about access to postpartum services, our purposeful sample may be mothers and their partners. So it's more heterogeneous, but ensure that there's language about the purposeful sample. Of course, you include some language around the phenomenon of interest, and in qualitative research, the phenomenon of interest that we're trying to describe or study, and that's, whether we're studying caregiving or grieving or access to healthcare services, it's always going to be influenced by the context in which it occurs. So we strongly encourage that you add some language around context, the environment in which that phenomenon occurs into your language. So I've given you some tips now on some ideas for designs, how to write an overarching research question. The next one to think about in qualitative research is what types of data are you going to generate? And most people in health sciences think, well, I'm going to do interviews. So if they say to me, Susan, I'm going to do some interviews, then I'm like, semi-structured interviews, structured interviews, unstructured interviews, an interview with one person, a dyadic interview with two people, or a focus group interview. There's a lot of decisions when you're thinking about how am I going to collect my data? And maybe you're not only doing interviews, maybe you're also going to do observation, or maybe you're collecting documents. So most people, when they're designing their qualitative study, really get stuck just on answering this question. What types of data should we collect? And that's a critical question, but I'm going to leave you with another resource around a framework. If you're writing up a qualitative study, you need to think through your methods. In answering question also, who's going to be involved in data generation? What types of data are going to be generated? Where will data generation occur? How will it be recorded and managed? And one of the hallmark parameters of qualitative health research is always about putting the person at the center of the research and thinking about the impact of the research process, not just only on the participants, but also the research team. So when you're generating your data in qualitative health research, how are you thinking about the emotional safety, both of your participants and your members of your research team? So again, another link to a paper on this framework of thinking through how to write this robust qualitative data generation section. Okay, so those are my practical tips for you. So now it's time to chat at the tables. And my task that I'm going to leave with all of you at your tables in your chit chat is, I don't expect all of you to go back to school now and get your 5-year PhD in qualitative research methodology. But what I do expect is that as you're creating and thinking through what are your mixed methods research studies, that you start to think about, okay, if you're not the qualitative methodologist, maybe who do you need to bring onto your research team? What are the skills and knowledge that you need to bring? And when I've been on teams that are doing trials, I see no hesitation for them to say, okay, we found a bunch of money for a statistician. It seems to be a no-brainer. And I'd like that equal to start to happen. It should be a no-brainer. Let's get a qualitative methodologist on our team. So I would like you at your tables to start to think about writing a job description for the qualitative methodologist that you would like on your mixed methods research team. And just start to make a list of what would be their roles and responsibilities. What will you ask them to lead? What will you ask them to consult on? Or what do you want them to do for your mixed methods research team? And what are the required skills and knowledge that you would ideally like them to have? And I think for those of you who are trainees, who are master's, research fellows, PhD students, this also becomes an opportunity for you to start to think about, I want to be this person on all those teams. I want to be my niche, to be the methodologist that can come onto a mixed methods research team. So what skills within your training program do you want to start to develop as a methodologist so that you can become this person?